Hello and welcome back to Behindthepaddle podcast with me, Paul and Victoria. So, today is one of those days where we're going to talk about a person who was quite influential and really helped pave the way with queer, kink, just female erotica, and very much a stepping stone in teaching people that BDSM was here. Women are powerful, and we certainly should not be afraid to show it. And so we're going to be diving into the legacy of Bettie Page, the woman with black hair with a fringe. If you see any of her beautiful modeling, especially when it comes to BDSM, you will see whichever side she's on, because she has played submissive before and she's played mistress, she's usually smiling away. And she really did help shape the language of modern BDSM. And before kink had a name in mainstream culture, before fetish imagery was legal, there was Betty. So we're just gonna talk about where she came from first. So Betty was born in Nashville, Tennessee in 1923. So, oh my god, literally over 100 years ago. Oh, that is terrifying to think. Just quite a while ago. So she grew up in poverty and a deeply religious Baptist household. Like, we're talking um women are taught to be silent. Women can't speak openly about certain things. Like, the husband has to be like the breadwinner, and women have to be modest, and they can't look certain ways and they can't act certain ways. Sadly, her father harmed her physically, mentally, sexually, and was eventually forced out. Her mother worked constantly, leaving Betty to care for her younger siblings. Despite these hardships, she freaking excelled in school. She learned about acting and performance and became obsessed with cinema and beauty. Dreamed of a bigger life than the one she had inherited. She earned a teaching certificate. I know, right? Crazy. Absolutely crazy that a sex worker, has qualifications. But New York did feel like freedom, so she left to reinvent herself. Now, I would like to say, like, I understand that I come from a traumatic background, and I understand that other sex workers can as well. Um, I would just say not all of us do. I feel like there is like a massive issue. I don't know, maybe it's like the trauma in me which makes me want to like say just like we're not all broken or little sprinkles of trauma. I think there's a bigger and deeper issue when it comes to misogyny, the patriarchy, and how we are as a society and how it has shaped us and, shaped our parents and grandparents. And it's absolutely horrible when people do have trauma, and when certain people do a certain job, they get blamed for doing a certain job, say sex work, mainly because they do have trauma, or they come from a broken family. Like, it's a disgusting stereotype. When, say for instance, myself and Betty, let's say, because we both come from broken homes, I don't think it's fair to shit on the person who has already went through so much trauma from evil fucking people that we're the ones who are shat on and not the bullies, whoever that may be. But that's all I wanted to say. At the age of 26, Betty newly arrived in New York City with a teaching certificate, a suitcase, and a dream for something bigger. So, at first, she worked secretarial jobs. But the beach, that is rebirth. Coney Island, summer of 1950. Bright sun, Atlantic wind, a bikini Betty stitched together by hand because she couldn't afford store-bought glamour. Amateur photographers noticed her confidence, and Betty couldn't be happier going in front of those cameras. But Betty became quite hyper aware of one thing. She had a weakness. She didn't like her forehead. Something she'd been teased about since high school in the late 1930s. Magazines at that time idolized actresses with lower hairlines, foreheads hidden beneath curls and waves. So, what does Betty do? One night, in a tiny Manhattan rental, she picks up scissors and gives herself a fringe. And that was the start. It wasn't soft bangs, but a sharp sculpted black curtain, a perfect arch framing her blue eyes. Within 2 years, her bangs are instantly recognizable across national men's magazines. Her face, her fringe becomes a brand identity. Also, how crazy is this that when she did move to New York, that the people who started to get her into modeling was actually a police officer with a passion for photography. Like, how weird. And that's how she created her first portfolio, police officer, of all people. She did originally want to go for acting, but yeah, she entered the field of modeling. And yeah, because she didn't like her forehead, she made that amazing iconic fringe which we all see today. So from the late 1951 or early 1952 through to 1957, she posed for photographer Irving Klaw for mail order photographs with pin-up and BDSM themes, making her the first famous bondage model. Klaw also used Page in several short black and white 8mm and 16mm specialty films, which catered to specific requests from his clientele. These silent one-reel featurettes showed women clad in lingerie and high heels, acting out fetish scenes of abduction, domination, slave training, bondage, spanking. Elaborate leather costumes, restraints were included periodically. Bettie Page alternated between playing a stern dominatrix and a helpless victim bound hand and foot. And if I love the images, I really do, because like they just look fun. They really do. So in 1953, Bettie Page took acting classes, which led to several roles on stage and television. She did appear on the United States Steel Hour and the Jackie Gleason Show. Her off-Broadway productions included Time is a Thief and Sunday Costs 5 Pesos. Bettie Page acted and danced in the feature-length burlesque revue film Stripperama. So she did do a good bit of acting and a few brief speaking roles as well. So, in the New York camera club scene, Camera Club was basically an early underground version of amateur glamour photography groups, long before modeling agencies like OnlyFans or formal porn studios existed. It was basically small groups of mostly hobbyists, usually male, photographers who would rent a studio or meet in a rented hall. They would hire models to pose, share the costs of lights, films, props, and they also became part of BDSM history because they operated very privately. And with that, they could push boundaries that magazines couldn't. They could do bondage themed images, women wrestling, playful domination scenes. They acted as a loophole in censorship law. If photos were for personal use only, they weren't usually prosecuted under the Obscenity Acts. And modeling for camera clubs gave women like Bettie Page direct cash because it was basically all cash payments and the ability to set their own boundaries. Like, we love boundaries, let's be honest. And you could have the creative input in the poses and the themes, and you could practice performing power dynamics in front of a camera. So, in other words, this was where Betty really did lean into the erotic language of control that later made her basically the queen of bondage with Irving Klaw. And of course, here, Betty learned to take charge of her erotic presence, and honestly, it seemed like she became really confident in herself. So, Betty Page first stepped into Irving and Paula Klaw's studio in the late 1952. The studio itself it wasn't glamorous, just a cramped space on 14th Street in New York. But inside, something extraordinary was happening. The Claws were building the quiet foundations of American fetish media, a mail order empire of photographs, silent films purchased directly by men who would never dare ask for such images in person. They specialized in what was officially called discipline photography, a coded way of saying spankage, bonding, and women wrestling with one another. These images traveled across the country, rolled into envelopes labeled as figure studios or physical education tutorials. Everyone involved understood the euphemisms and delighted in the secret. Bay thrived there almost immediately. Her acting instincts made her perfect for fantasy situations. The wicked nurse punishing a patient, the captured spy struggling against her ropes, the strong villainess wielding a whip. Sometimes she played the helpless submissive giggling through her predicament. Other times she became the attacker. Powerful, leather clad, confidence radiating from her every movement. Betty was not a woman who could be typed into one role. She was switch energy before the language existed to describe it. Bettie Page was Miss January 1955, one of the earliest playmates of the month for Playboy magazine. So Page did continue modeling up until 1957. When the camera turned off, the world did not suddenly grow kinder. Betty tried to rebuild her life in religion, becoming a born again Christian, studying theology, and volunteering in ministry. But unresolved trauma and years of public scandal collided inside her mind. As you can imagine, still to this day, when it comes to gossip, bullying, people trying to one up each other and push other people down just to get ahead in life, it was still like that back in the day. So by the early 1970s, Betty began experiencing severe mental health symptoms. To this day, we don't know exactly what went on, but we do know in October 1978, she did move to Southern California, hoping for a calmer life. She wanted to be very personal and she didn't really want any attention. She really did just want a quieter life. And I feel like it really does show that with the lack of information we have after she departed from modeling. She was admitted to Patterson State Hospital, a forensic psychiatric hospital in St. Bernardo, California, after being diagnosed with a severe mental illness. Now, there is speculation that it was schizophrenia, but we don't really know. And again, several accounts, like I've tried to research this and like multiple things say multiple different things. And it honestly kind of sucks because like she did want, you can clearly see that she just was struggling and she wanted a quiet life. She didn't want to be disturbed by anybody or anything like that. Like there's so much unconfirmed and speculations. I don't really even want to speak about them because like we don't know if it's true. She literally hasn't stated anything about these. But what I can say is that it seems like she was struggling. But while she was trying to live quietly, I mean, she is down in history forever. She will always be remembered. She was a very big part of the pin-up industry. You see it in burlesque performers, the way they style their hair, or in tattoo artists. Um, I mean, queer women saw in her wrestling imagery a blueprint for desire that welcomed them home. Rockabilly fashion declared her the eternal queen of pinup. A lot of people do. In the 1990s, licensing agreements finally brought her real income. Recognition long overdue. She agreed to interviews, but only if no cameras were present. The voice was allowed to age, but the image not. She sadly died on December 11th, 2008, at 85 years old in Los Angeles from heart failure. She had not been seen publicly in over 50 years, but she was everywhere. May have not been her up to date self, but she was there and she will continue to live in the minds of people. So, doing some research, literally could only find like one picture of Betty Page where she was her older self and she's smiling and she's with Anna Nicole Smith and Pamela Anderson and it's crazy because like you can see that it is Betty Page. It's beautiful, but it's horrible to know that like she just didn't like the way she looked to be able to want to see herself on camera. In some of her last years, she did hire a law firm to help her recoup some of the profits being made with her likeness. And also, randomly, I would like to point out that, like, Bettie Page was only 5'5" in height, which is crazy because, like, we see, like, the high fashion models, especially the past few years, um, where you need to be so freaking tall, and it's crazy. Thankfully, in being a model these days, anybody can be a model, which is amazing. She was also 9 stone, around about that size. And here we are at the end of the episode. Betty Page transformed the meaning of bondage, not just in American culture, but all over the world. She showed the world that restraint without fear is a love language. She demonstrated that submission performed with consent becomes a declaration of sovereignty. She treated pleasure as play and play as power. Her smile and bangs told us that being looked at does not have to hurt. I really, even though this is a short episode, I did really enjoy learning about Betty Page. And honestly, just I find it very interesting when it comes to people of importance, where they have given us so much. It is quite interesting. And I hope you've enjoyed this short episode about who Betty Page is and a little bit into her life. This has been Paulson Victoria with Behind the Paddle podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, then please leave a review on Spotify, Apple, wherever you're listening. And I hope you have a good week. Bye.